Anyway, so here's what we're talking about today after all that stuff. We are going to be exporting things, and we're going to take these exports. And so somebody has a situation. Hey, they recorded a chapter in an audiobook. Now, this could come up with a voiceover. You have this big project you've done. You want to pull out a little sample, put it up there, maybe put it on TikTok, something small. There's 100 reasons why you might want a little subset of your audio. And if you have a lot of events, at first it seems complicated, but it's actually quite easy. It's almost too easy. And then if you have, so you have two basic scenarios you'll work with. One, you have a track like I do my blue track here. And in the blue track, there are many different segments of audio, and there are a bunch of different events. So if I had a 30-minute chapter, I might have 40 events in there. I might have 10. I might have 200. It doesn't really matter. I have a lot of them, and that's going to be scenario number one. Scenario number two is I've already processed my audio through RX, and then in the process of exporting it, it automatically bounces it all into one event, and therefore my yellow track here represents the user case where you have it all in one event. So if you have it all in one event and you want to export 5 minutes, so in the scenario that came up in the Studio One group, I think they wanted the first 5 minutes. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to show you if you wanted the first 5 minutes, if you wanted this little subsection in the middle. There are a lot of options there for making this all work. Now, the simplest thing is if you do have the VO Jumpstart and you want to export a little selection here, one, as long as I zoom out a little bit, I can go ahead and highlight something, and then I could export that, and of course it'll do that quite easily, where I have, let's see, I'm at 230 here-ish to about 530 here-ish, and what will happen is everything will get set up right that way, and it will make it all happen for me, and I don't have to think about it if I'm using the tools that are in the VO Jumpstart. Now, if I don't do it that way, then I'm going to do it all manually, and I want to show it both ways just in case, depending on what you have and what's going on that. All right, Gabby, thanks. I can hear you fine on YouTube. And let me refresh here over on Facebook at the same time, see if there's any comments. No comments there. Okay. Well, thank you, though. It's always super helpful to know that. And in this case, we'd be exporting, and see, I have a couple, let's see, from right here to right here. You can even see it moved the markers for me because of my macro toolbar. That's in the VO Jumpstart. But if it didn't, I could have moved them easily, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But so those are the two scenarios we have. We have lots of events, and you want a subset. We have one big massive event, and that would have been because I either exported or I bounced it. I'll show you that option in a few minutes. But I'm also going to take advantage of my blank tracks down here if I'm doing this. What I used to do in the beginning was I would highlight something, and of course you can manually set the start and end markers if you choose to. If you hold down the Control or Command key, you can set the start. If you hold down Alt or Option, you can set the end in the marker track. And that makes it easy if I wanted to just do something without paying attention to anything else. One of the easy buttons is if I know where I want to start, hold down Control, hold down Alt, which means Command or Option, and I get the beginning and the end, and I can move them there. And of course, I could drag these around to where I want. If I turn on Snap, it'll honor Snap, so I can get Snap to Grid, I can get Snap to Events, depending on what I'm doing there, beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But I can get very precise with these, and then I could just use those with song, export stems if I chose to, and do this all manually. Okay, so that works pretty well. Now, so let's talk about the easy scenario. It's not really, they're both easy, but I'm going to talk about, this is how it's going to be for 80% of the people, because they're going to have a consolidated track because they exported it, they worked on it in RX, they let RX run some of its magic on it, and they batch process things, especially if they're working audiobooks, and they're going to have one consolidated track or one bounce track, and then all I need to do is I can highlight across that. Keyboard shortcut, Alt-Y, will always set to the current selection. Alt-Y, Option-Y will set to the current selection, our start and end marker. Those shortcuts work whether I can see them or I have that hidden. So you do not have to have the marker track open in order to see that stuff. But if you do have it open, you will see it. So I should have zoomed in here, and I'll zoom in now so you can see it there's the start and the end. I can drag these around to exactly the points I want them. And of course, like I said earlier, if I have snap turned on, let me turn on snap to grid. Well, I have snap to events, snap to grid is turned on there. And then now, as I drag these around, you can see that it is snapping. You can see it kind of snap between different spots. So I could get very precise spots if I chose. If I was doing a commercial and I needed it to be exactly 30 seconds or 1 minute, I can have the end or the start at a certain point, and that's easy if I have snap on. I'm not really talking about snap today, but that's a great tool if I need to be hyper precise with my timings. A lot of times I don't, so I can drag across here and use my macro shortcuts, and then it is going to reset those for me, and I don't need to do it myself depending on what I select. And I'm going to go ahead, let me zoom out here on that. So if I select my first one, I'm going to select the active track. Yellow track is active. It's now going to get the beginning, and there's 15 minutes. If I have a little selection in here and I select my second menu option, I named it as just selection and export that. You can see behind the scenes, it set it to whatever my selection was there. So that's easy. That makes it simple. I can just get a subset in there. But what if you want to be hyper precise? You want to have a start point and an end point? Well, there's so many little details that you can do. One, once you have a generalization, so let's say I want to start at approximately 3 minutes, and I want a 5-minute sample for my audiobook. So that's going to be 3 plus 5. Don can do that in his head. Amazing. I know some of you won't believe that. You'll think I pre-calculated that, but I'm going to just say 3 plus 5 gets me to 8. All right. So what I would do, let me close this over here. I would look at this. I go 3 to 8. Okay, cool. I've got it. Watch this. I highlight across 3 to 8. Now, did you notice how non-hyper precise I was? That's because I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we have multiple tracks. A lot of times I like to keep a clean track of exactly what was going out the complete chapter. And if I have a sample, I like to put it on its own little track, because sometimes I will manipulate it. Sometimes I will do other things in it, and I'll give you a quick example. I'm going to take this, click on it, drag it down, add Alt, and now I've got this track here, and I'm going to change this color for us just so we can talk about it. So now red track is my little subsection here. Now, because I've made a little subsection, now I can take this little subsection, and first I can decide, I would go through, zoom in a little bit. I'm going to listen. I'm going to just pretend that I already knew that this was the end. So I either can double click, that puts a split in there, and press delete, or just drag this back, and there's my end point. And then I would go all the way to the beginning point here, drag down here, and say, oh yeah, that was supposed to start over here. I might drag it up a little bit. I'm going to zoom in, and so you can see that. Get my cursor here right to the end. Just drag her back right to the point that it needed to be, and then now I have a beginning and ending that are working pretty well there. But here's the other cool thing I would do then. If I'm doing a sample and it did not start at the beginning, then I'm going to almost always have a little fade that's in here to make my sample better. And I'm going to, let me zoom in on that so you can see it here. We'll zoom this way. And then right here, we're going to fade in. We grab the little drag handle in the corner of the event, and we're going to drag it over. And this way, if it wasn't at the start of the chapter, if it wasn't at the start of the voiceover, I now am zooming in or fading in and letting my listener know, hey, that wasn't the start. Now, I will also do that at the end sometimes. Let me go over there to the end, and I can do the same thing there. All right, now don't go that far. It really fade out at the end. So if I can, I want a cliffhanger. Ooh, what comes next? But it is very effective to also just simply fade out and have that last word or two not be something that they can hear, and that works pretty well too. Okay, so that both of those techniques work really well. So it really works out that if I need to get a subset, if I was going from the beginning to the end, I can highlight that, and as long as you start at the end, did you notice that mine moved over there? I'm going to do that again. In the timeline, if I start at 5 minutes, because I wanted the first 5 minutes, and then I drag it over, I can get the first 5 minutes easily. Now note, we have a sub right over here. What isn't obvious to everybody is, I'm going to zoom in. When I'm right here, I get the little cursor, which I call a seam cursor. And so I'm before, I have the normal range tool on both sides of it. But if I get right to the edge of my selection, I get to a point where I have a seam cursor. And it's really hard to see on this screen, but go try it on your copy of Studio One. Click, and I now can readjust this. Now I'm going to make this a dark color just so we can see it easily. If I have this right here like this, when I'm on the edge, I get the seam cursor. And with that, you can click and drag and readjust after the fact. So what does that mean? The real takeaway from that is, I don't have to be hyper precise the first time I do this. If I knew it started right around 6, then I can go ahead and say, okay, yeah, see, right there. And if you drag off the edge, you see it will keep going. And depending upon how zoomed in or out you are, when I go down here, I get the seam cursor. I can extend it. It goes faster and faster. And by the way, can you see this little tooltip here? That's going to be very hard to see. But that tooltip is telling me that I have 5 minutes of audio selected, 6 minutes, and the further I go over here, the faster it'll go. So now it's 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. You can just, if you're dragging, depending on how far you go left or right, it'll drag more, it'll drag less, okay? So you have all those, you have a bunch of tools for doing that. I'll make that kind of yellow again. And now, so that makes it pretty easy, all right? Now you have a bunch of other tools that you can use against your different tracks here based on whatever you're doing. So people sometimes ask me, whoa, what's the best way to do it? It kind of depends. Plus it depends on your skill level. But if you don't know, I have a couple other tricks and tips and tricks that'll work. Let's say we have, let's eliminate the easy scenario, which is it's all been bounced and you have one. Now, if you record and you have all these events, I do not recommend you bounce that track. It makes no sense to me. Keep that track. There are good reasons, and you'll thank me later for that. And watch this. So right click, duplicate track complete. I better zoom in on that so you have some chance of seeing that. Duplicate track complete. And now I have another track. And I'm going to use this track, mute this track, and then I'm going to take this one right here. And by the way, I have a feature turned on that automatically turns on. It automatically arms a track. I was testing that for somebody else yesterday. So now I have this track here. I don't need this track. I don't need the second track, but it gives me a ton of flexibility. And what's my liability if I mess it up on this track? Nothing. All right. If I mess up this secondary blue track, I have no liability because I still have the first track there. So what I'm going to do is right click and hide this track so that I don't care. And now I'm just working on the other track. So let's say we're going from 4 minutes to 7 minutes. Okay. Just as an example. Well, one of the things you can do is now look at all this. What a mess. Let me make these small because we're not working with this one and we're not working with this one. By the way, I use this as a decluttering technique on everything I do. The track that I'm working on tends to be big. The tracks that I'm not working on tend to be a little smaller. Sometimes I'm working on a lot of tracks and I can see them, but this is the primary way I work, which is reduce the clutter and just have the stuff I'm working on right there. And that makes life a little bit easier and cleaner. And I just prefer to do it that way. You don't have to do it that way, but that is definitely something that doesn't hurt when you do it, okay? So check this out. I said I was going to go from about 3. Well, what you can do is if you click right here, that's a little bit before 3. All right, a little bit before 3 minutes. Whatever the event is before 3 minutes, I'm going to click on it. And I'm just going to pick this one. That's good enough. I can do, whatever I want. But just have enough space so that I can get it on the screen. And then I have all the way to whatever I want on the end. And I can go a little faster, a little further. But now I get this over it, and I have the arrow tool. Let me see if I can zoom in on that so you have a chance to see the arrow tool. Look at that. There's the arrow tool. So I have an event selected. I hold down Shift, and I drag across the bottom of this, and watch what happens when I let go. When I let go, it is going to select all those events that are within that. And do you remember earlier, I had created a, this is a scrap track. So I don't really care what happens to it. It's a scrap track. I duplicate, complete that other track, and watch this. A lot of times what I will do is drag it straight down to a new track. Now this becomes my, I'm going to zoom in here, sample track. Okay, sample. I'm going to put an next character in there. I'm going to take that character out of there. And there's sample track. Now I have a sample track, and because I have this down here, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to do Control or Command B and bounce it all to 1, and now it doesn't affect anything because I have my original track up here that's hidden. I can go back to that at any time. I have a superset. It started a little before I wanted. Now I do everything I did before. I adjust this. I adjust this wherever it was supposed to be. I put in my little fades if I want to fade. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It just depends on what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, what's happening. There's so many factors there. But now this is going to be my sample. And of course, I'm going to simply export just a selection on this track. So I'm going to be going to this sample track right here, export stems. And I'm going to let everything else go between the start and end marker. And it's 4 minutes and 43 seconds. Now, here's something else that's pretty cool that I didn't show you before. There's other ways to do that drag across. Okay, so let me undo some of this stuff. Undo, undo, undo. Look at this, put all this back in. So if I were on an event here and I wanted to go all the way, so if I knew I wanted the first 5 minutes, and I guess what I really would like you to take away from this is there's a whole bunch of depth. Nobody remembers all of these. Sometimes I have to think about them. You just do whichever one that's the easiest for you at that time. Number one, if you are off the end of a track, you have a bunch of options. If I drag across the top, it selects a range. Okay, so it's selected all the way from, but if I'm at the bottom half of the track and I have the arrow tool, it'll select all the events. So it kind of depends on what you're doing. Sometimes I want event selected, sometimes I want a range. But notice, if I am trying to do that and I want to get the first 5 minutes, I can't do that. Meaning I can do, but what I can do is select someplace, hold down Shift, and now I can drag across and get all of them. So I can get that same behavior. Alternately, I used to do this because I didn't know about that other shortcut. Watch this. I know I want the first 5 minutes, and now I'm just going to delete those out. And now that I've deleted those out, I can do the same drag operation that I just did and start in the other section that isn't, there was nothing there. If you start in a blank spot, you can drag across and get a range or a selection. If you start someplace and hold down Shift, you can drag this way. If you start at a certain spot and you want to go all the way back to the beginning, Shift Home on the PC will select all of them. If I'm over here, Shift End will go to the end. So, man, nobody's going to remember all those. But no, Edit, Select, and there's Select from Start to Event, Select from Event to End, and there are other tools that aren't obvious. And someday I'll show you, I'll do another session on how I learned a bunch of mouse shortcuts for doing all this stuff. There's a whole bunch of other shortcuts that I'm not even showing today, because it just gets overwhelming that there's so many ways to do things. So I want to show you some good ways of doing it, and I have other shortcuts that I use, and I just don't usually tell all 6 of them at once because no one remembers all 6 of them. So you have some tools. Now, if I wanted the first 5 minutes, by the way, I would almost always do this kind of thing where I have hold down the Shift, select across those if I was starting with an existing event. I will very often drag them down. I'm going to add Alt or Option and give myself a copy. And then from there, I can bounce it, Control Command B, do what I want with that, and I still have the other one sitting there. But duplicate tracks are your friends. If you use a duplicate track, what's my liability if I make a boo-boo? and I make more boo-boos than you've ever seen. Matter of fact, I'm the king of undo simply because I've undone more times than most people have done, even processed audio. If I tens of thousands of times over my career where I've undone something and redid it and gone through and go, oh, that didn't work, and undo. But if you give yourself, you have all these blank tracks in this blank area, use it to your advantage, make a copy of things, make a copy of tracks, right click over here as your friend. I'm going to zoom in here. If you right click here, this is one of the golden tools for you to use so that you can muck around. And if you make a mistake, so what? You just remove that track and delete it. But duplicate track complete is your friend. You can make a copy of a track, a copy of another track. You can copy a whole set of tracks. And then you can test things and try things, and you just have zero liability. It's this great thing. These people on these simple DAWs do not have the ability to have all these extra tracks, and now this becomes my sample track. And I can fade in, fade out, adjust the volume. Oh, that was, perfect for one scenario, but now that I'm doing this demo, or another example, sometimes a part of a book might be really quiet. So I'm going to bring that part up because I want it for the sample, and I want it to be louder even though it was a little more laid back. Maybe it's too loud. I want it to be quieter. And remember, because this whole thing was averages, so if I had a 20-minute chapter, I may have a little subsection that's just too quiet. And based on that, then I'm not enough is getting out to people, and so I'm going to turn it up or turn it down, depending on what I'm doing. There's just so many reasons that you can use to fine-tune this stuff. So, all right, I hope this helps. Let me look for questions or comments across my two platforms here. I don't see any in Facebook. And let me check on this other one here. And boy, that's what I wanted there. All right, Gabby, I hope if there's anything that you want to ask it now. And what you do see there is we have a bunch of options. I didn't even show all of them because remember, there are more ways to select things. Use the scrap tracks. There's just a lot of functionality, and so I see people doing it the hard way all the time. The other thing I could have done, I can do it if I only want a subsection though. Sometimes I see people, one, if you use it, they'll split doing it the hard way. You just simply double click within a track, and that will work for you. Double click on the other side if you want. Now I have a little event in here, and it's even easier to see with the darker colors. You see I have a little event in here, and of course, if it's me, I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and drop it into its own track. Could be the beginning, could be the end. I could have taken this whole thing right here and just brought it down to its own track, and now it's in its own. I like to do that. I have a tendency to have use my tracks for different things, different purposes, and then I mark them. This would be marked for me, and this is the alternate demo, and I do something like that. And if I don't, it just depends on what I'm doing. Okay, what are you doing? And depending on what you're doing, you can label these things and have different versions: a short version, a long version, a super condensed version. And this is the fine thing, I pulled a subset. I made a copy of this track here, and so it means that later I can get back all that audio that I lopped off, or I just pulled a subset there. And look at that, it's just going forever. Because really, when you make a copy, it understands the copy was part of a bigger thing, and it's able to deal with it. And even though we don't see it by default, it's still there. And then when I'm done, if I don't want to keep those things, I'll just remove the tracks. So I just want you to know, you can make this super easy. And if I select it across all these, that's going to give me one behavior. If I'm going to select an event, hold down the shift and click and drag across, and I have a whole bunch of events. And if I use, I never use it from the menu. Where's bounce? Bounce is under event probably. And there it is, bounce selection. So all that could be bounced to one thing if I needed to. I don't need to go through and do that. As long as you keep a non-bounced one, I'm good with you bouncing. First, you can do anything you want. If you want to bounce the whole thing, cool, go ahead and do it. If you have My Tools, by default, if you have any one thing selected, it'll bounce the whole track. Should show that. Let me undo this. If you have My Tools, doesn't matter what you have selected, anything or nothing. If I have and I make this track active, if I have one event, I choose bounce, it just bounce that whole thing into one. Okay. Then of course you can undo that, and so yeah, so you get that there. All right. Hope you have a fantastic. Oh, I see somebody else. Mark, you're welcome. Sure, John. If I'm always taking. So do I? Yeah. So John's asking a great question. And first off, yeah, I always take questions outside. If I can't deal with it, I mean that's why we do live. If I'm not willing to take any questions, then I'm an idiot. And once we cover whatever we're covering, I'm more than happy to take other questions. It's the beauty of live. Yeah. So how do you deal with breaths and clicks? How do I learn to read would be helpful. Do you leave some breaths at a low volume when you do audiobooks? First off, audiobooks should always have breaths in them, almost all. And I'm totally against taking out, unless, I mean, hey, AI can talk, and it has no breaths. And absolutely guarantee you that people who are working on their own stuff take out too many breaths. Now, clicks and all, that's a different thing. Clicks are RX. I use RX exclusively to deal with all mouth noise and clicks and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to breaths, then I have a whole different concept. And let me go over here and see if I can pull this up here, and I'll show you what I do there. Well, if I'm going to do that, let me pull this over here. I'm going to go to YouTube, and I need to go over to my dash content here. And then instead of that, I'm going to scroll down and get my first fifth. Oh, I'll just do it the easy way. Breath. And I'll even put this in the show notes here. Show all. I got to get to all of those. There it is. Right here. Let me pull this up. I have a video. And I'm going to I copy that in. And I'm going to put that in there. And here's exactly how I deal. Here, boom. Now I just put a comment in there for you, John. Basically, what it really comes down to is that booth breathing, I have a whole technique for it. Breaths should be handled during the performance. Okay? You can deal with those during the performance. Now, if I have something from somebody else, I might deal with it. Yes, you can bring them down. If I want to bring them down in Studio One, it's too simple. I would find a breath. Let me see if I can find a breath here. Or I'll simulate a breath. Let me pretend. It doesn't really matter. So, of course, there are breaths here. You just can't see them. And why are they so quiet? I worked at it. You can too. I have hundreds of people that no longer take out any breaths because they have learned to practice their breathing when they are not in the middle of a recording. But if I did it and I had a breath in here, let me make it big. Let's work on one track here. So now I have some breaths, and they're still not. There's a breath. So Studio One makes it too easy. I could go like this, double click, and drag it down. That's too easy. And there now I'm doing erotica. No one's ever asked me. They don't think of me and sexy in the same thing, but that's a different discussion. So I can put that back to default. It just turns out that I can highlight a range, double click with the range tool. So highlight a range. Let me turn down the zoom. I'll just take anything else. If I wanted to turn down a breath or turn down a section of audio, highlight across it, go in the middle of it, double click, it puts two splits in there. And then it gives me the little drag tool. Drag it down. Quieter breath, quieter section. Louder breath, louder section. It's too easy. I don't do that, though. I do not do that. I don't recommend you do that. Work on it in your performance. Now, like I said, if you have something already totally done, okay, then you can do some of it. But I guarantee you, 95% of the people have the same syndrome of, I just got I bought a car for my mom, a used car for my mom. So now that I know about this car, it wasn't her original choice. But I hadn't paid attention to this car, but it came up and it looked like something I thought my mom would like. Somebody else found it for me and showed me. And because of that, I ended up going, yeah, that's really cool. Now, I had not paid attention to this car before. And then since I bought a used one with my mom, she needed a new car. And now I see them all over the place. I realize, wow, more people have them than I ever thought. I just hadn't noticed them because I wasn't paying attention. When you start paying attention to your breaths, you will notice them more and you will reduce them more than you need to. So go through and first check out that video that I posted there on breathing and booth breathing. And I promise you, you will get to the point a month from now where you will not edit any breaths. Number one, unsustainable. It would take 2 years to continue to do that all the time, where you end up editing out. I mean, how many times do you breathe in a minute? Average person breathes every 10 seconds, plus or minus a couple seconds. So there you have 6 per minute, and you start doing the math. When you have a book that's, say, 3 hours long, and how many minutes are in 3 hours? All you got to do is 60 times 3, and then you get the number there. It's called a lot. Way more than I'd like to discuss. And you could go through and you could do it. And in Studio One, you can do it in RX. You can do it in Studio One. There are some tools. And people will tell you about the deep breath tools. And just trust me, none of them work super well for one main reason. The sound of a breath is embedded in some words. And because of that fact, they cannot take out breaths really, really well at this point in the technology life. There is not a single tool on the market that I've ever tested where I thought, wow, that really worked great across every breath. They get some, they miss some. Some people tune them. Some people go back and listen to them. You really have to go back and listen to every single breath if you use one of the tools. But if you wanted to do something, I could highlight this, hold down my shift key, and go through and highlight this and pretend I went across and I did 4 breaths, and now I can double click in here and I get all 4 of them and I can adjust them all at once. Okay, let's make sure you can see that you're adjusting them all at once. All right, and there's 4 of them, and boom, they're all going down, they're all going up. I could adjust a whole set of them all at once, but I used to do that, by the way, and I used to paste in good breaths, and I used to do all that. I used to reduce them. Breaths are life. And breaths, if I sigh, that's how I feel about people taking out breaths. So don't do it. You still want to sound human. I'd rather have an extra couple breaths than sound human, and that assumes I don't have a medical condition. Maybe if I had asthma, if I had a severe cold, if I had something, and there are some people that have breaths that they should reduce, and they can reduce them through practice, and they may need a little tech help short term to do that. Cool. That totally works, but it's not something that I recommend people do consistently, more than one book. It just takes forever, and none of the tools do it well. And if you use one of the tools, listen back, and I have listened to hundreds of recordings with it, and I hear, that guy used a tool, because you can tell they're inconsistent. And, I'm going to go back and listen to them all. Yeah, you listen to a 10-hour book, you miss stuff. I do. Everybody does. It's just life when you're editing. So I use the declickers can do plenty. The mouth declicker from RX is the way to go to deal with clicks. You can do manual declicking as well. I do use, for audiobooks, I use RX, and if you're not using RX, you're missing it. It's on sale as of this discussion here. And I have a helicopter going over here. I don't know what's going on tonight. Boy, somebody's in trouble, because there's a helicopter that's flying around in my area. Anyway, all you need to know is don't do it for the breaths, but check out that video. And then let me know if you have a question and you have some little things you want to tweak. Cool. I just don't do it anymore. I did it originally, and I can tell you, nobody is really impressed when you reduce all the breaths. They just go, okay, whatever. And if you left them in, nobody would have bothered in 90% of the cases. All right? So, yeah, way more information than you wanted to know. Be sure to join the Studio One group if you're not in there already on Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube page. I put these tips and tricks and videos showing cool things about Studio One 2 to 3 times a week at this point, and that'll I got enough material to do that for the next 2 years. And so if you have a question, be sure to ask it in the group or ask me directly, and I'll do a video on it if that's helpful for enough people. And I just have so much material, but I'm always looking for what's the thing that could help you the most. So as always, I look forward to seeing you on the wires. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like this. Be sure to share it with other friends. That helps the channel grow. And join the Facebook group. We'll see you on the wires. Bye-bye.